Hello, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Dr. Peter Colosi, and I am a philosophy professor here at Salve Regina University, and this is my 11th year here. I think this is my 5th Circle of Scholars. I really enjoy doing these, so thanks for coming. So today's topic is called Charity and Clarity, and it is something that I talk about on the first day of every class. And it sets the stage of how to have conversations, in particular with people with whom you disagree in a healthy way. And that's something, as everybody knows, we've kind of lost in our culture with all this polarization and everything. So the main points I want to cover today are what kind of discussion are we actually talking about? Then, what is knowledge? What is truth? If any of you were here during my talk on morality and lying, those two topics will be a repeat, but they pertain to this topic as well. Then, what is charity? What is clarity? And then 5 possible outcomes if a conversation is done in this way that could happen. And then we'll have to talk about the emotions, because in conversations that deal with touchy topics, there's a lot of emotions that come up. It's not just having a rational discussion. Then I hope we'll have time for all these things within an hour, and we'll have 30 minutes for Q&A. And then I want to tell you just some stories of how this has been successful in classroom discussions on difficult topics. And then we'll have Q&A. So we'll just do these one at a time. So what kind of discussion are we talking about? We are talking about a discussion where the two sides, the two people, it could be more than 2 people, disagree strongly on one of these topics that are often considered kind of hot-button topics. Could be euthanasia. Last time when we talked about lying, we had some good discussion in the Q&A. Like today, right now, just coincidentally, they're debating up at the State House, legalizing physician-assisted suicide. So that would be a topic. And that's going to be one of the ones I talk about in my examples in the classroom. So, what is knowledge? So, in order to have knowledge, you need a subject of knowledge, which is the person doing the knowing. Okay? And for that to happen, the being doing the knowing has to have an intellect, the ability to grasp and understand things. So like a chair can't be the subject of knowledge. And then the object of knowledge is the thing you want to be familiar with. And that has an essence, like some substance to it. An example could be in biology, could be a cell. So there's an actual structure to the cell that's independent of your thinking. And you want to use your intellect to pay very careful attention to all of its parts and so forth, and understand how it is in itself in reality. And if you get that, you interiorize the essence, the essential structure, in this example of a cell, how it really is into your intellect, then that is the content of your knowledge, and that's knowledge. Okay? Now we want to know things about all sorts of things, not just cells, all sorts of things, including these difficult topics. Some opposites to knowledge. One of them is error. So that would be like you have something in your mind, but it's wrong. So if you ask a child, what is 304 times 762? And they say 16. That's an error. That's false. If the child says, I don't know, I didn't learn that yet, that's ignorance. It means you just don't know. And then opinion is actually not quite knowledge. You can have wrong opinion and right opinion. And right opinion doesn't yet mean that you know the thing. Like if I ask you all, what is the Pythagorean theorem? And there's some of you said, oh yeah, we learned that once in school. I think it's a cubed plus b cubed equals c cubed. And someone else says, I think it's a squared plus b squared equals c squared. You both have opinions. And you're like, now if you take a test The person with the squared is going to pass, and the person with the cube is going to fail. But they were just kind of educated guesses. That's an opinion. That's not yet knowledge, even if one of them lines up with reality. So knowledge is actually if you could teach the Pythagorean theorem to somebody, then you would have knowledge of it. Okay. So, in a sincere discussion, the goal of both people on one of these hot topics is, or should be, to seek to recognize if either or both are in error or ignorant or just have an opinion. And the goal is to achieve knowledge about the object in question, to the extent that that's possible. Some things are beyond our minds, so we can't know everything, but we can know some things about reality, okay? And that's the goal. And I'll talk about this more as we proceed, but by sincere, I mean that both of the people in the discussion really want to know what reality is. They want to know how the thing is, even if it turns out to be against what they thought it was. They both want to know reality. Okay, what is truth? It's very closely connected to knowledge. So one of the ways to try to talk about what truth is to look at what are called truth theories. We're going to look at 3 of them, but there's lots of theories about what truth is that philosophers and other people have put forward. And if something is a theory about what truth is, it could be wrong, a false theory about what truth is. But anyways, here's 3. So one theory of truth is called the consensus theory of truth. And this one says a proposition, or we could say, in addition to a proposition, you could say a thought or an assertion that somebody makes. So the consensus theory of truth says a proposition is true if all or the majority of people believe it is true. Some people actually think that's all we can get is consensus. Okay. And they really think the number of people who believe things is what makes it be true. Okay, that's a consensus theory of truth. The coherence theory of truth says a proposition or an assertion is true if it can be argued to with logical consistency. So like if you take a logic class, usually at page 1 or the first day of class, you're presented with a basic syllogism. If A, then B. If B, then C. Therefore, if A, then C. And that's a formal logical structure which is correctly arguing. And then the logic teacher will say, let's put some meat on that. And usually the first one on page 1 says, Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. And it's true. He's dead. And that's putting meat on the structure of if A then B, if B then C. Therefore, if you have A, you know you have C. But now listen to this. Premise 1. All white things are made of cheese. Premise 2. The moon is a white thing. Conclusion. Therefore, the moon is made of cheese. That is logically sound, but invalid. It fit the logical structure of if A and B and so forth. It has the same middle term. But the reason it's false is because one of the premises does not correspond to reality. The first one, all white things are not made of cheese. So the correspondence theory of truth says truth is when our assertions, our propositions, our thoughts match or correspond with the way reality is. That's what truth is. Okay? Now these other two, consensus and correspondence, they can be helpful in the pursuit of truth. You should argue with logical consistency. Or if a lot of people believe something, they're probably on to some aspect of it. But those are not foundational for truth. This one is. The correspondence theory of truth is when the things we say about reality accurately capture the way the real thing is. That's the correspondence theory of truth. Okay. A side point, which we'll talk about later in the talk on consensus theory of truth, is if someone actually thinks that you can never find truth in the correspondence sense, and they decide consensus is all we get, that can lead to a lot of moral problems, because then people just want to manipulate the masses all to believe something. Since we can't get real truth, that's the difference between Socrates and the sophists in ancient Greece. Socrates was convinced that we could know reality. It was hard, but we can know it. The sophists gave up on truth. They just thought there was no truth. But they still had an intellect, and the sophists are like, I can't use it to find truth. What the heck am I going to do with my intellect? I know. I can manipulate people. And there you get things like propaganda or manipulation in the media of the masses and so forth. It's just trying to make a false consensus, not find out what's real. Okay. Now, one more thing about truth. It's an important point. The content claim distinction. So if you make an assertion to somebody, if you say about your friend to someone else, she bought a new car. Or if you say, the earth is flat, so I pick a true, potentially true one and a false one. Those are assertions, okay? Assertions. If you ask a question, did she buy a car? Or is the earth flat? Which maybe people asked a long time ago, which they did. You know, if we say 1,000 years ago, the consensus was the earth was flat, and now the consensus is the earth is spherical. Let's say in the middle when they were debating it, it was 50-50, just for the sake of argument. The planet itself didn't particularly care what anyone was thinking in all three of those periods. It was just sitting there being spherical. And the fact that the majority of people thought it was flat did not make the proposition true. What makes the assertion, the earth is flat, false, is the earth, or its shape. That's what makes it false. It doesn't correspond to reality. Okay, but now, when we make assertions to each other, they differ from questions, or if you want to put it grammatically, kind of a declarative versus an interrogative sentence. They both have the same content. She, car, buy, earth, flat. Content is the same. But there's a huge difference between an assertion and a question. An assertion has something built into it that a question lacks. And that is a claim to being really the case. So when you say, my friend bought a car, you don't have to say, and she really did. It's built in. It's built in. Every time you assert something, you're saying, this is how it really is. You're assuming correspondence theory of truth. This, if you were here during the lying lecture, just to make a side point, is one of the ways to show why lying is so immoral. When we make assertions to each other, because every assertion has built into it a claim to being corresponding to reality, we automatically give each other actually a beautiful gift. The hearer of an assertion gives the speaker of the assertion almost automatically the gift of trust and belief. So if someone says, she bought the car, you go, oh, I'm so happy. Well, your happiness is the second thing. The first thing you did was believe it. Liars, they know that assertions have a claim to truth. They know that they're going to get the gift of trust, and they're going to use it against you. That's what I said in the last talk about why lying is immoral. But it brings out this idea more clearly that all our assertions have a claim to the correspondence theory of truth. So someone who says there is no truth has a problem because of this. If someone says there's no truth, you can say, oh yeah, what about 2 + 2 = 4? And they'd be like, oh shoot, you got me. But if they say there's no truth, you can say, oh really? Is that true? Yeah. And then they have to say yes, but then they say there's truth. So it's the reason why that can't be said without contradicting yourself is because it's an assertion. It built into it is a claim to truth. Okay? So there was a famous person named Cratylus in ancient Greece. He was a complete skeptic. And Aristotle writes about him in the 4th book of the Metaphysics. And Cratylus wanted it to be so bad that there's no truth and he realized that every time he asserts anything, he's claiming truth, he decided to stop talking for the rest of his life. So it's kind of a cynical type of attitude to, okay. So, all right. Now, if you get someone to realize that no one is a relativist, every time you assert something, you're saying this is how it really is, then you can start talking, okay, there's truth. Let's see how much of it we can find. Okay, now, these conversations that are challenging, I'm calling it charity and clarity. So, what do I mean by charity in one of these conversations? So, caritas is a Latin word where we get the word charity from, and it means love. And in these ancient languages, because love is a multifaceted reality, they have words for the different types of love. Like in Greek, there's eros, which is this yearning love or being in love, or agape, which is divine love, reaching down to love someone lower, or storge, which is like a familiar, the warmth of affection among family members. And then philia is like brotherly love or neighborly love, like Philadelphia, city of brotherly love. Okay, all these different loves. Well, caritas means love, and kind of storge, philia love. And to listen to another person is an act of love. I don't mean in love. I mean it's an act of love. And we all know this from two ways of experiencing sharing something of ourselves. So one is, this often happens like if you're on the phone with somebody and you're sharing some really personal thing that you wanted to share with your friend. And a few minutes in, you kind of have this sense they haven't responded, they're not listening. And suddenly you realize they've been doing email. And that's kind of hurtful, isn't it? You were pouring out your heart, or that's why the phones are so sad. Like people are talking to you and someone's doing this while you're talking, and it's like, I'm here. So that proves that when you're sharing something personal and they don't listen, you feel disrespected, which is like the opposite of love. The positive is when you do pour out your heart to somebody and they really take in what you're saying and they empathize and so forth and maybe participate when they can in the conversation, you feel loved, you feel heard, you feel respected. Okay? So it's a surprising thing to say, but when you really think about your own experience of it, to really listen to somebody is a way to show them love, and they feel it. So, in a conversation like this, so now that was about sharing personal details, so now let's get back to what we're talking about. We're talking about a conversation between two people who, and by the way, in a sense, that's also personal. Like if you're talking about one of these topics that's very controversial, you're also sharing something of yourself, because if you have a strong feeling about it, there are reasons why. Okay? So this first part, when you're the listener, if you want to prove that you have listened well to somebody with whom you disagree strongly, the way to do that is, if you can repeat back to the person what they think, it's going to be hard to do because you're probably going to have a lot of emotions against wanting to say those very words. But if you can repeat back to the person what they think and their reasons why they think it so well that when you get done doing that, they will think you agree with them. But it's not because you do agree with them, you don't. It's not because you're trying to trick them into thinking you agree with them. It's because they think their view is true. It makes sense to them. And you just expressed it accurately. So they're going to be like, okay, how come you can't see that? If you can do that, that means you heard somebody. You listened to somebody. Okay. What is clarity? Now it's your turn to share. After you did that, after you really took in their view, and you understand it so well you can explain it back to them and they're like, yeah, you got me. Now it's your turn to talk. And here, you have to make sense. What I mean by that is you have to give reasons that are graspable by somebody. You have to give explanations, arguments that are graspable, and someone can check if they're true or not. Or I put it, you have to strive to make sense. So that's the reason why I mitigate a little bit there is, and I tell the students this in the class too, if there's something that you feel strongly about, but you've never before had to articulate why, and this is the first time, you actually might have trouble coming up with all of your reasons. And that's okay. In fact, what I tell the students is, if we get into that situation and you're in that spot, you can just say, can I think about this between now and the next class? And I will say, of course you can. Go think about it and try to come up with your reasons and come back and we'll have an even better conversation. So you either have to strive to make sense or actually make sense by thinking about it. And you know, we all know that experience of like in a writing process. You're writing and then you let it sit for 3 days and you're like, who wrote that? And so you realize you have to refine your thinking over time. Okay. But if you're going to be clear in this conversation, you have to say something that someone else with an intellect can understand. And then that other person, if you're doing that, should give you the gift of love that you gave them. They should listen carefully to your view, your position, your reasons, and they should be able to repeat it back to you as you think it. That whole thing I just described used to be common, like in Middle-Age debates and so forth in the Middle Ages when you read those. Now we have, as one of the other speakers here, Dr. Campbell gave a talk a few weeks ago about polarization. This is the last thing people want to do, which is very sad. It's very sad. Oh, here's another thing. You may have heard, you know the idea of a straw man argument? So a straw man argument is when you want to refute somebody, like maybe they're not there, or maybe they are, and you set up their argument, but weak, not how they really present it, so it's easy for you to knock it down, a straw man argument. Well, what's more respectable is if you can, what's now called steel man. You try to come up with the strongest argument for the view that you disagree with and present that and then try to refute that. That's respectable. Straw man people is a cop-out. Okay, so I used to have 3, and then just this past semester, some really interesting class discussions about what can happen at the end of a conversation, so I added a few. So let's imagine it's 2 people, and they're talking about one of these difficult topics, and they actually do this properly. Everything I just described. They listen to each other, they can recount each other's arguments to each other. One thing that can happen is, one person totally flips to the other view. That can happen. Oftentimes that might happen because maybe one of the 2 actually had never really thought about the topic. And the other person had thought about it for years, and they just explained it. And the person's like, oh, I didn't know all that, I see it. Another reason why that can happen is because there is reality. There's reality. So if someone shows you what's real and you didn't see it before and you actually grasp reality, then you're like, oh, I'm going to say what you say now. I see it myself. So that's one thing that can happen. It's maybe one of the rarer things that happens in these conversations. But it can happen because there's truth. All right, next. This famous saying, they can agree to disagree. But it seems to me this can happen in a true way, and I call it false, but I mean maybe uncharitable way. So the true version of agreeing to disagree would be if you do everything I said before, and you can actually articulate the other person's views and their reasons for it, and they can do that to your views. And then you still just both say to each other, I totally disagree with you still. But you could both ace an exam question on the other person's view. That is true agreeing to disagree, because you understand them. The false agreeing to disagree would be like you're incapable of reading their view back, you're plugging your ears when they're talking, and you're just saying, I disagree with you, with no interest in listening. That would not be actually a good agree to disagree. Okay. Another thing that could happen is they both realize they're both wrong. And some third view is actually closer to the truth. That can happen too. And then this is maybe the one that, in a healthy conversation, this might be the one that's most likely to happen, where they both remain fundamentally the same. In other words, they both kind of fundamentally retain their position. But the thing is, and again, if it's in a sincere conversation, and we'll talk about what an insincere one is in a minute. You can always learn something from another person, even if they totally disagree with you, because something happened in their life, in their education, in their way of thinking, that is giving them an angle on it that you don't have. No one of us is God, okay? So even if it's somebody you disagree super strongly with, if you do the whole charity and clarity thing, there's some aspect of it you could learn from that person. On the idea that they're both sincere, looking for reality. Okay? If it's somebody who's just a total manipulator and they're not interested in reality, which I'll get to, then maybe not. But if it's a true charity and clarity conversation, you can learn something, and then you might have to like adjust one aspect of your view, or they might show you that one of your arguments is ridiculous and you didn't know it, and you would have to admit that and go look for another argument on that point. That's like how they say iron sharpens iron. That's one of the best people, as I said before, the debates in the Middle Ages, philosophical and theological debates, and good debates now. You want somebody who's able to make the strongest possible objections to your argument, because you're going to miss your mistakes if you don't have someone doing that. So that's actually a gift, to get someone who disagrees with you to enter into an actual conversation with you about it. Okay, and then can you guess the fifth one? It's kind of funny. They both switch to the other person. So now that would be really funny. And you convinced me. You convinced me too. So that would be funny. But and this came up and a student came up with that one, and I'm like, that's a good one. That's funny. And then another student said, if that last one happened, the way, I think this is probably right, the way it would happen would be after the two people leave and they're away from each other for a few days and they think about what the other person said, it could potentially happen that both of them are like, I think they're right. And then they come back together and they tell each other. All right. Okay, now, the emotions. So, obviously, in conversations like this that we're talking about, there's going to be strong emotions coming up inside you. Probably, mostly, when you're listening to the view that you disagree with. And the person is explaining it, okay? And so, a lot of times I'll ask the students, what are the emotions? And they'll say anger, frustration, wanting to plug your ears, all these kinds of, you can imagine all the emotions that we've all had in conversations like this. And so it does have to be dealt with. What are we going to do about the emotions? Because we're not just computers talking to each other. And the first thing I would say is just notice them. Just notice them inside you. Say, oh, there's those emotions. And keep listening. Keep trying to get the person's argument correctly understood as they think it. And you can actually notice them and feel them, but keep listening. Don't stop listening. And that is not unhealthy emotional repression. It could be if then you just walk away grumbling and you never get to do charity. But, oh, wait a second. I forgot a note, but yeah, I'm going to say this now. It was something I forgot to say in clarity. So, the reason why that, just noticing your feelings, feeling your feelings, and keep listening is not unhealthy emotional repression is because when you get your chance for the clarity part, you can express all of your emotions. You're good. It's good to have passionate feelings about what you believe strongly. It's good. It's not bad. In fact, that is going to be the fifth one coming up here, I think. Okay, it's a sign of respect to have those strong emotions. So you're just letting your feelings be there, these negative ones, while you're getting their argument, and you're swinging their argument back to them. And don't worry, you're going to get to be express all your feelings when you express your feelings. Okay, so all right. Now another thing that can happen is you could have too little emotion when you're talking to someone about one of these topics. And it's a kind of indifference. And if I would suggest, if that's what's going on inside you and you just like have no interest at all, then probably just tell the person and say, let's go play tennis instead. Because you're not really respecting them. You're not involved in the conversation. Okay. All right. Then too much emotion. And there's going to be actually two of these. This is the first one. So one is, if those emotions up there, and the first one, get too out of control inside you, then it can just block your ability to even hear the person. And we can ask ourselves, why does that happen? Why does it happen? And I'll give a few. We can talk more about them in the Q&A. But one reason why your emotions might start is because it's gradually dawning on you that they're right. And that can be humiliating and all this sort of thing. Or we could have some very strong built-in unchecked biases that are being exposed and you're feeling that. That could be a reason why. Fear of being wrong, or fear of having to change your life if what the person is saying is true. And I guess I could have put another one on there. Because these topics are so, as I said, controversial or whatever word you want to use, they're also very personal. And so it may relate to some trauma in someone's life. And that could be why. And that's a whole area of the discussion that I don't really have in today's talk, but I have experienced, especially giving lectures on certain moral topics in medical ethics. And even one time, just talking about the proofs for the existence of God. So I've had people, just in the audience yell at me. And it's a little bit surprising, especially on that proof for God's existence one, the guy. And I said, no, and I just explained the ontological argument. He stood up again and did it. This was a long time ago. And I was just starting out as a teacher, and I just kind of, a few days or weeks later, it just dawned on me. There was something going on in that guy's personal life that he didn't want there to be a God. I don't know what it was. But I wasn't even talking about morality. I was just going through Thomas and Anselm, the proofs for God's existence. And then on some of the moral, I've had also people get. So, all that to say, in these conversations, either in a setting where you're giving a talk, or in a personal one-on-one situation with a family member, it seems to me that sometimes there are times when you can just detect, even if, let's say, you're the one in the truth and the one who has the reality better understood, it's not worth it right now, or it's not the time for pastoral care reasons. You just wouldn't want to, there's too much going on in this other person. just, let's go like this. All right. Now, the other thing that's very common now, so another reason, although that was off the charts too, but sometimes, which we've seen, you know, on TV and on the news and at these university lectures and so forth, where the emotions get kind of irrationally off the charts. And that's where we get these things like people just barking their views at each other on TV talk shows, not doing any charity and clarity, or calling people names. You know, that's one of the things I say. Although the younger students they're not interested in doing that. They like talking to each other. They really like presenting this on the first day of class. But in any case, I say, you know, there's going to be no yelling. There's going to be no name calling. Cancel culture, I'm sure you've all heard of that, where they just try to cancel people who just want to present a view. And then sometimes even violence. You know, you see these lecturers at different college campuses. There's people outside, they have to bar the doors, they want to pound them, and some of them have actually gotten attacked. And then this is what I said before. So in one of the very first slides, I said that every single thing I'm saying in this talk is based on the premise that the two people in the conversation sincerely want to know what is real. And they want to respect each other. That's the only way this can work. So, for the concealed agenda point, I'll get to the no argument comment in a minute. If one of the people in the conversation is just a consensus theorist, like I said before, or has some concealed reason why they need something to be true, and they're not looking for reality. If something that they're holding is going to get them a lot of money or power, or they can manipulate people or whatever, there's all kinds of motives people have for saying things are true that have nothing to do with wanting to know if it's true. So if you're in a conversation with somebody like that, then you're not in a conversation. You might think you are, you don't know it, but you're not. So everything I said here is based on the two people wanting to know what's real, even when it's hard to countenance the possibility that the view you disagree with is right. The point about not having an argument, I sometimes think one of the reasons people get yelling or things is precisely because they have no argument. And in fact, I think I have. Yeah, okay, so now, those are all problematic. Well, the top one is a little problematic, but it's okay. But now something kind of positive about the emotions in all of this. So to have strong, passionate feelings about what you believe is good. It would be a little bit odd if you didn't. It would be a little bit odd if you didn't have those. And I would even add, it shows charity and respect for the other person. If like it's the opposite of that apathetic attitude. If you're talking with somebody and you both strongly have opposite views on something with passionate feelings, and you're like, that shows you're listening to each other, that shows you care about the topic. To have strong feelings is good. It goes, and it even makes, I have some things down here, so when it's your turn to talk, it's going to fill you with energy when you're talking about your topic that you wouldn't have if you didn't have those feelings. I would even say that having strong feelings in some mysterious way adds to the clarity of your argument. In part because the other person is empathizing, but I bet even in some mysterious way magically helps you think of better arguments when you're, okay. And then the strong feelings, so if you're really convinced that your view on this topic is right, and this other person, let's say it's a situation where this other person is not only wrong, but you can see that them believing and acting on that is going to be harmful for them in life. Some of your emotions are coming from genuine concern for that person. Genuine concern for that person. And another thing, if you have strong, passionate feelings, a lot of times that's coming from or goes together with a kind of confidence and self-assurance. Because, like you said before, you actually have knowledge. You know your arguments. You know why you think what you think. And that you don't have to be afraid of not having an argument. You don't have to yell, because you have something to say. I think I forgot to put it on here, but one other point that goes with this is if two people leave a conversation like this, and like one of them is kind of bitter and angry, it might be because they didn't win or they didn't have the right arguments or so forth. But some of the things I said before. But let's say you are convinced, or you actually have the position that is real and true and good, and the person doesn't agree with you. And let's say it's even someone you know and love, and what they think is going to maybe even hurt them later in life. I doubt you're going to leave angry. You're going to leave full of concern. You're going to leave with a certain compassion for that person. If you leave angry, you probably think your view maybe isn't right or something. It's hard. There's a healthy anger, like, why are you that? but mostly I think there's going to be a compassion there. Okay. So these are a few stories that I'm just going to tell. So one of the things I do sometimes, and I mentioned to you today at the State House, they're debating this, now they call it medical aid and dying. Previously it's called physician-assisted suicide. And then there's euthanasia. And I gave a sort of scholars talk on that whole topic, so you can watch it if you want to. But one of the things, when I covered this topic in the classroom, I spent some time going through all the arguments I can think of and research in favor of legalizing physician-assisted suicide / medical aid and dying, and all the arguments that say it's immoral and should never be legalized. And we spend time going through them carefully in the classroom to make sure the students get it. And then, so if it's a written assignment, which is what I do with this often, I have them, like their essay or final or something, they have to write 2 or 3 of the strongest possible arguments they can come up with in favor of legalizing that. Then they have to write 2 or 3 of the strongest possible arguments they can come up with against legalizing that. And then, after they succeed in doing that, expressing those arguments as the people who hold those arguments hold them, then in the third part, they have to say what they think and why. And I've always been so impressed with those essays. Like, I think younger people are less averse to doing this than older people. Because I'm reading them and, oh, wow, this person's in favor of legalizing euthanasia. And then I get to part 2, oh, no, this person's totally pro-life. And then I get to the third part, oh, they're confused. But the thing is, they did the first 2 parts. And in the third part, they're struggling. They're still thinking about what they think. Okay? But they did the first 2 parts. That's what people can't do anymore these days, I would say. Okay, this is kind of interesting. There's going to be 4 of these, so this is the second one. And these 2 are writing and the next 2 are talking. So when I was in graduate school, one of my professors had gone to undergraduate at Georgetown University. And he told us this, and I've never taken the time yet to look this up. But he said that back in the 1800s at Georgetown, you know what I just told you about euthanasia with the students writing both sides? Okay, the professors did exactly that on slavery at Georgetown. And those student essays are there. And so you can find students arguing just calmly all the strongest reasons they can come up with in favor of, and the student was for slavery, and all the ones who they came up with arguments against it. You know, they both got an A, very well written, congratulations, and then they went to lunch. And you read these now, we look back, and we're like, wait a minute, how could those students be so sincere in favor of slavery? And I want to suggest to you that it's very easy to look back and say which side you would have been on. But when you are living in the midst of one of these, for some reason, it's harder to see what's real and true. Which is why we have to have conversations like this to try to get to what's real and true. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you 2 stories of ones that I did in the classroom here. So I don't have one set up for us to do in the Q&A, but we'll see what happens in the Q&A. You can take it any direction you want. But one of the things I did was, do you remember, I don't know, maybe it was about 4 years ago or something, there was this swimmer, I forget his name. So his name, I forget his name when he was a him, and then he said he was Leah Thompson, and then he beat all the girls in the NCAA swim. Okay, so that was big in the news. And so I had mentioned to the students, and I've done this actually twice in 2 different semesters, after we got to know each other a lot, and we all liked each other. I said, do you guys want to do a charity and clarity conversation about one of these topics? And so I did a swimmer, and I was very pleasantly surprised at the range of views in the room. So there were students who said biological men should never be in women's sports. There was one female student who was a world-class sailor of single-person sailboats, and she said, in my sport, it's equal, and so men, I didn't know that. I said, okay, that's one where they could both. Right? But, and then there was one girl in that class who actually said biology is irrelevant. And there was a very conservative boy in that class, and they learned this, so he was so nice to her. He said, can you explain why? It was just big. So what I want to say is, once you set this up, they like it. It's endearing to watch them be so nice to each other when they disagree with each other after you set this up, okay? And then, a couple years later, I did another one on transgender operations, and that got heated, but it was really helpful. And I was, again, really impressed with what happened. If you want me to tell you, I will. But then, so what happened was, the swimmer one, so after they did the swimmer one, that class, I had 2 sections of the same course back to back. And the first swimmer discussion, the students left, and the next group came in and said, what'd you do? Why is everyone so happy? And I just thought about it. So I did the same thing, and it went well. So then, a week or 2 later, this was relatively soon after the masks had come off. I said, do you guys want to do another one of those? And they said, okay, what? And I said, how about COVID, vaccines, masks? And this kid in the back of the room said, no, we don't want to. And I said, I said, why not? I said, okay, you don't have to, but you do have to tell me why not. And he said, because we think people our age think about it different than people your age. And I said, so I can reveal a little something to you, which I don't mind revealing. I said, you might be surprised with me. That broke the ice. And it was such a good conversation. And they were telling me everything they thought, like the absurdity of if they were in the dining hall, they could eat. But if they got up and went to that table to get a napkin without putting a mask on, they get yelled at. Anyways, it was, and then, so that was in the same semester, those same two. And a couple weeks later, I came into my classroom, and there was this kid in there early. I came in early, really tall basketball player kid. And he goes, Dr. Close, I have to tell you something. I said, what? And he said, I really liked those two classes, the swimmer and the coding. And I told you all before, I was so surprised at the range of views, I wasn't expecting it. I was expecting everything to be left, and it wasn't. There was everything. And I said, I was surprised to the kid. And he kind of looked at me, and maybe I shouldn't have said it this way, but I said, and I remember his view. He was kind of a little bit like left of center. He had serious concerns about biological men playing women's sports, but he referred to Leah with she pronouns, so he was kind of, so just a balanced kid trying to figure out life. And so he said, I said I was surprised, and he looked at me, and I said, I thought you guys were going to be all mind-numbing zombies, and you weren't. It was like a whole range and a great, thoughtful discussion. And he said, a lot of times we feel like we have to be. And basically, you let us. We all had these things we wanted. Every one of us is walking around, all of you probably during this talk, you're thinking about some of the topics you would never have a conversation about like this with or something. So we're all walking around, and we all have that. We're all walking around with this interiority, with all these thoughts and feelings that we have about all the issues that are going on in the world. And in certain settings, some of the people are afraid to say what they really think, okay? And in those two classes, they all knew they didn't have to be. And they all were nice to each other and fully expressed the most opposite of views and listened to each other. And so it's and they were so happy. It's because we kind of have a need to share. We have a need to share what we think. And if you live in a society where there are forces saying you're not allowed to, that causes a lot of problems. And if you suddenly find a setting where you can, it's very freeing. Oh yeah, so that's what, this is, I already did this. So I told you how they wrote. They really, I was so stunned with those euthanasia essays. Like, it was like, I mean, I just thought maybe it was because they wanted an A. But they really, I was stunned at the level at which, at the effort they took into putting down exactly the pro and the con views, how the people hold it. I was like, wow. And then, in their conclusions, they were struggling with it themselves. Some of them were very pro-life, some of them were very pro-choice and euthanasia, and then some were like, oh boy, I see this, but I don't understand this. But that first part, I was like, holy smokes. And in the speaking, as I said, they were very loving to each other, and how they felt about it. They liked doing it. They liked doing both of them. I think young people are less jaded than older people, and so they're more willing to listen to both sides. Okay, let me see what time it is here. Oh yeah, it's like 3:56. So, okay, that's the talk. we can have Q&A if you want. Yes, sir?
Where in the real world would you find a controlled classroom setting to let you?
So that's a great question. So he said, and I'm not sure if these are coming through, I might repeat the questions. Where in the real world would you find, and I don't know if I would say a controlled classroom setting, I would say a free classroom setting, but I will, it's a good question. So your question is coming from the fact that in our current culture, this is uncommon. But in other times in history, it was not uncommon. Maybe it's all, you can even read in the Middle Ages of stories of like priests debating each other, and one of them punches the other one sometimes. Of course, we're not going to be perfect. We're going to express, we might have to apologize after for something we said. But the thing is, people tried before. So, you know, this debate they're having at the State House right now, you can put in testimony. So I actually, when I wrote in my testimony, and if, I mean, you can see my other talk, I'm opposed to legalizing euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. But I wrote along the lines of what you just said, and I said a few things, and I sent him an article that I wrote about it, and I said, could we, I said, this State House thing, I don't know if you ever testified up there, but you wait for like 2 hours, and then you get to talk for 2 minutes, and the congressman might ask you a question, and so I wrote in there, I said, could you guys please, like, ask WPRI to set an hour aside and have a few people from both sides have a long-form discussion about the pros and cons of the Lila Manfields against the Compassionate Care Act, so everyone in Rhode Island can actually hear the arguments, not these 2-minute screaming matches the day before the vote. I haven't heard back from him. But that's what you're right, we lack that. That's what we need, something like that. So, and there are some places where I suppose it happens. I'm not going to be too pessimistic. And I think it's happening more, actually. I mean, I think podcasts, you know, there's a whole range of them. Podcasts aren't face-to-face conversations that you're not physically present in. But you do find people gravitating towards those on lots of these topics because you can get a whole argument heard or out. And that's what people kind of want more. I want to hear all the reasons behind something, not just a couple people barking at each other on a 5-minute news segment. So the internet is one place, but maybe we all need to think of ways to create those things. Yes, ma'am?
In order to gain the knowledge, the complication in my mind about some of that is AI now. So people are gaining knowledge that is originally false, let's say from an AI perspective. And so they go into a conversation with what they believe because they got it from the internet or I think that's a big piece of what's going on.
Right, we have a huge hurdle to overcome compared obviously to Middle Ages, but even to like, I don't know if you think of early, you know, like communist propaganda and so forth, we have that issue on steroids now. Because people could use and do use AI and the media and you know, like psychologists and neurologists get involved in this and they figure out how to manipulate the masses. So that's something unfortunately we have to be aware of in these debates. But we can still find truth and do, it's harder in some ways, but we just have to make more of an effort to do genuine research. I'll do order, 1, 2, 3. But make sir in the back, then ma'am here, then sir here.
Yeah, I'd like to counter on the AI thought.
Well, go ahead.
It's, you know, I think that oftentimes we take as gospel what an attorney or an accountant might give us for information, but you find out that their views might be limited or might be being steered through your own research by using AI. And so AI can be a useful tool for you to question an authority or somebody who represents themselves to be an authority. And it can be, but it doesn't necessarily have to be correct. You can be re-educated by it, but it might allow you to ask better questions, to challenge an authority, and to make sure that the authority is thinking about things which he or she might not have been thinking about.
Right. So that's a good charity clarity right here. And I think we can, I mean, you both can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we can say you're both right, and it's not a contradiction. The question is a tool, how is it going to be used? That way or that way? Hopefully that way. Yes.
I was just going to say, I think in American culture, I don't know if we ever cultivated it, but we're definitely out of practice. There used to be kind of a saying, there's two things you never discuss, politics and religion. But those are actually the most real things in every single person's life.
Yeah.
If you want to talk to me about what color is my favorite color, your favorite, or more appropriate in that thing, fine, great, we can.
Right.
But the things that really matter, where truth matters,
Right.
we as Americans were taught to avoid those topics at the dinner table. And I think the last opportunity many of us have had is in our education at college. That's what I think college did for me, is you often were exposed to views and realities and actual formal presentation of knowledge, and you get to do what you're describing in the classroom. And just, I think it's a shame, but I also think at this point, because we're so out of practice in America, and you don't discuss religion or politics, when we do, which we're at really crisis, points, and we're starting to have to, or we must, because there's not been much of an exchange here and there. You don't get an incremental, exposure and opportunity to adopt another view.
Right.
Because all of a sudden we're in crisis mode.
Yeah. Right.
And it's a shame because I actually grew up in Germany, and as an American, and boy, when I stayed there and I worked and I had lots of German friends growing up. Pardon? I'm sorry?
Do you speak German strong?
Yeah. And I also went to a school where we had many other cultures. My dad was stationed at the embassy in Germany. And so we had a lot of other embassies kids in the State Department school, or the Defense Department school that I went to. And then we had also kids from the local economy, the Germans themselves, with dual citizenship. So I was always exposed. But Germans don't mince words. When you go, do these pants make my ass look big? They'll go, yeah.
Yeah.
They, and so from a young age, I got bombarded with facts that I had no idea. My father was a military man. Vietnam was a big deal. I got bombarded with facts from other cultures that I was like, what? And then I had to learn that, that is true.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's very fulfilling to be able to do that.
But you could adopt incrementally.
Right, that's what we've kind of lost. I mean, we need to find, like the gentleman back there was saying, we need to find settings where we can start to do that again. And there are, as I said before, I said in the context of trauma, but there are some places, like at the Thanksgiving table, when it might not be appropriate to get, but it shouldn't be a blanket rule. You're exactly right. We need to find ways to, be able to do that again. Sir?
I was going to ask you if you thought the way we communicate with each other is a problem. Email, cell phones, chat, nobody talks to anybody.
Right.
Particularly the younger generation, they chat, they text, and nobody directly has eye contact.
Right, so that's, I don't know if that came through in my talk, but it's a huge difference when you're sitting with somebody, in front of somebody, and talking about, because it's a whole human being, body and soul, and you're empathizing, you're feeling their feelings, they're feeling your feelings, and so that's one of the complaints about the comment boxes. They're just the trolls, people are cruel to each other, because you don't even see the person who wrote whatever they wrote. But whereas if you're face to face, I do, back to the question back there, I forbid laptops and phones, and even if I see them on their watches, I tell them to take my watch off, because I want them to just be with each other and me. And I will say, in years past, it was more of a struggle to get them to put the screens away. I think there's a trend among the young people now of being sick of the screens, and they want to be more together. Yes.
Two things. One is, at the risk of embarrassing myself, is when we talk AI, okay, AI this and they're going to take jobs away. The only AI I get is like Google something, and the first thing is the AI information
Right.
of it. And I know it's the AI, then they had that little disclaimer, oh, this could be wrong, And then I'll go to the next one because, like, particularly Mayo, I don't go to AI, health. Don't stay at AI, go down to the Mayo Clinic or the Cleveland Clinic. So that's the only AI that I get exposed to. But the other thing that we were talking about is, when you have different opinions, and sometimes we already know, oh, don't talk about politics with this one, because we already know what he thinks, and we shouldn't do that. But I think if I changed my head and had a conversation, if I looked at it, I'm just gathering information
From this other person.
from this
who you
other
think
person,
is you.
and be respectful for that, and then they can gather information from me of what my view might be. If we could all think that way, just on a one-on-one or in a group.
Yeah, that would be a helpful way to cool your emotions. You can say, oh, I'm gathering information from this person.
Yeah.
If as I said before, if they're both sincere, then we do need to try to check those, oh, I already know what they think. Because everyone's a person, like we have deep thoughts and layers inside us of why we think things. And so it's a very beautiful thing to just let someone share with you.
Yeah, as opposed to pushing your own point. It's just like, because a lot of times I'm surprised at what they say and I go, something to ponder, something to ponder. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just wanted to tell you, you can't go on your iPhone and change settings to not get AI.
That's true.
But it's getting better and better, and it's often quoting the Mayo Clinic.
Oh, okay. Okay, well, that's good. And yes, I'll do 1, 2.
It feels like having people, and I don't want to make it like formal, but people who are trained as facilitators would be helpful. Just in the concept so that when emotions start to get out of control, they can bring it back down again. But I can think of like times where our family gets together at Thanksgiving. They all come from out of town, so it's not just a single day thing. It might be 4 days. So people are around and topics come up all the time. And it's a group that has a lot of diverse opinions. That I think you could have one of these conversations, but it probably takes someone who's going to be the mediator and try to make them be respectful of the other person's thoughts, because it is so far out of our normal practice these days. But I do feel like there are settings like that where, like I've been to see at ours, we would pick a topic and say, this is what we're going to talk about, and people I think would actually get into it and enjoy the conversation. But I do feel like it might take someone who's going to take the person that starts to go off on their own idea and not listen, bring them back in.
Yeah, it sounds like the point there, and one of the points about incrementalism in your point is, so it's emerging, one idea that's emerging is, because we're so not used to doing this, we need to gradually relearn it or something.
Sometimes I think what makes it really difficult is that there's so much constructed media reality. You really have to do deep dives to know what the truth is. You're trying to get information to form an opinion on something, but you find sometimes you give partial or slanted information. And so, we heard about Trump and the Russian collusion and all that coverage, but how much coverage came out saying, no, that was fake news? That didn't come out. And then, there are other examples we can get into, like left versus right. It just seems like one party seems to have more control over the press than the other. So it's very difficult to find out the truth.
Right, and there's, like I said before, that's a problem we have on steroids. the media, I think if we really, I think that there's a lot of manipulation going on, and it's too bad. Yeah.
I was just going to say, kind of to that same point, it's just that I've been in conversations with family members that have very opposing views too. You just have to get to a point, you have to start by saying this has to be respectful and honest, and if it gets off, you gotta just stop. Because there's times you can, there's times you can't.
Yeah.
People won't stay with your rules.
Right. No, that's okay sometimes to just recognize a time when it's not the right time. And then sometimes push through and say, come on, we can't do this, and whatever. Any more? Well, a new person, then I'll come to you. Yeah.
I was just going to comment that there's a French philosopher, Sorbonne, who's written a book titled a small treatise on the great virtues.
Okay.
And he starts with the most superficial, courtesy. And he ends with the deepest, love. But what he shows is how they're connected. And this is all about rules of engagement and courtesy.
Courtesy. That's a good one.
We don't see that.
I was going to ask you, the one you brought up of euthanasia.
Yeah.
I'm a physician.
Okay.
I've seen medical journals, Mayo Clinic, Harvard University. There are opposing positions on both sides who are armed with the facts on each side about a topic that is clearly also, there's a moral argument, there's religious arguments, but these folks will fight it out as if they have the knowledge, the facts. And so it makes you somewhat, it's a very difficult thing to come to a conclusion, even as a physician, looking at my colleagues, battling this out.
Yeah.
So
what we've been talking about here is like, I don't know what the word is, the rubric, or whatever you just said. But some of the topics, there's a place, I forget which dialogue, maybe the Meno, one of Plato's dialogues, where someone's getting very frustrated and saying, can we ever get the answer? These arguments are so strong. And then Socrates says, don't fall for misology, which means hatred of reason, just because some topics are harder to get to the bottom of. If we just transpose ourselves back to 1860 at Georgetown, and I was giving this talk, and you were sitting there, you would have just said to me, you know what, the arguments for slavery are so strong, and I read it in this journal, and the arguments against it are so strong, how are we ever going to get to the bottom of this? It's impossible.
Civil War.
Yeah.
That's how it ended, right?
Yeah.
650,000 people died because of
Right? And the reason is because, it's sad that happened.
Yeah, but it was like, they were talking from academic,
Right.
Georgetown. They're not talking in the real world.
Right.
People who are actually experiencing it.
Right.
And there were fights in Congress at, I think, the center of Massachusetts got beaten up a couple of times, whatever. But it's,
So
sometimes what level of education you have has a lot to do. And if there's alcohol involved, which a lot of times, wherever you are, if you're at a cocktail party and people start talking, barking at one another, then it can get out of hand.
And actually, you just reminded me of something that I forgot to say, because I wanted to ask, when I explained the Georgetown thing there, what you think of that. In other words, the truth, it could be a problem to be so non-passionate about such a grave injustice and think of it only as academic. And so there is a righteous indignation about severe injustice. that is good to have, and if you delete it just to have a purely academic conversation, you might, end up with a civil war. But the flip side is, on this topic of euthanasia, so I'm going to suggest to you that there is an answer, and it's just as serious as the slavery point, and we are in that zone right now of not being able to see it. And so the question is, do we keep, if everyone was sincere in the search for the truth, I think conversations would lead to it. In the back.
It's kind of ironic. I thought you were going to bring this up, but wasn't it Georgetown that actually had slaves?
Exactly.
And they had to make, apologies to their student body as well.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's kind of, it would be interesting to see what those discussions were back then.
Right.
In the context of, well, these slaves were walking around.
Right, yeah, there might have been these ulterior motives going on. As I said, I haven't looked these up, but I remember my professor who went there telling us that just from the point of view of the academic discussion in the classroom, he found it intriguing, like I find it intriguing to read my students being able to write both sides on euthanasia. They did the exact same thing back then. But yeah, there's usually ulterior motives going on too.
I was gonna just ask, like, sometimes, I know there's truth, but is there always like an absolute truth? Is it not kind of, as humans and in the context of the reality that we are living in, like the age you're living in, that it is more important to explore, in addition to the facts, but what is the motivation? What, not so much the morality around it, but just explore, like, how harmful is this or not? Greater harm, lesser harm, determine what is the lesser harm, especially when we're talking about legislation. Is there always an absolute, but maybe there are criteria like what would harm less people or be less harmful to the environment, or the most harmful law we could enact? Because even saying like euthanasia has an absolute at this point, there are many states who have adopted those laws, and again, I'm just saying, but isn't it often, or wouldn't it be important to explore the motivation and what is motivating the society or the entity, the state, to move in a direction to even legislate or regulate something? And then harm is a big concept, or should be.
Right. So we, and as I said, I did one talk on euthanasia, but it would really take, what would be interesting, I know some of the Circle of Scholar sessions can be like 3 or 4 long. So I was going to say, maybe that could be something we could do that with euthanasia and actually get to the bottom of both sides and try to see something. But what I would say to your question is that, well, I would just ask you to just consider whether because there are some things, like the speed limit, that fit into what you're talking about. But ask yourself if you would be willing to have that approach to slavery, and get have some states that regulate it, and some states that outlaw it, and some states that love it.
I can give you a better example, feeding people. We decide some percentage of the population will deserve to be supported or fed, and there's, if you do the numbers, there's some percentage that we go, so what? You don't eat at night.
Right.
Your children go to bed hungry.
Good.
There's, again, limited resources and then motivation, and least harm, most harm, who's going to be harmed.
So we're gonna, so rather than try to go, I guess my short answer is, on some of these questions, there is an absolute right or wrong. There are things that you should never do to another human being. Never.
But that's your opinion.
Well, but often, sometimes it's not possible. Like, hunger in this country. Nobody should be hungry.
So,
I bet everyone would agree with that. I
So-
don't think you'd have an argument.
I know, but
But now, putting it into practice, how to do that.
But I'm not arguing, there are other considerations that.
So what's happening right now is we're thinking of different topics, and we're trying to do all of this in 3.5 minutes on the topic, which you can't do. Okay? So bye-bye, please come. So like in the last talk I gave about lying, that the moral question of lying, which I argued is always wrong to do in that talk, does lend itself to a one-session search with scholars, and it had a very interesting Q&A afterwards. But it took me time to lay out the 4 reasons why lying has been traditionally considered to be intrinsically immoral, and get everyone to understand it. And then once that happened, there were some very good objections to it, and we talked them through. And so you have to, so now I don't think right now in the last 3 minutes of the session, we should pick a hard topic and try and just say that there are some, like slavery, that actually had an answer and it was blurry then, and others like euthanasia, you have to, or lying, you have to take the time to explain both sides, and you're right, there's strong arguments on both sides. But we don't have time to do that right now. Yes?
What about, every once in a while you hear someone say, well, this is my truth, and it's the truth that I perceive. And then the other person say, well, that's my truth. And is the truth different to other people?
So,
Does the truth hold differently to people?
yeah. I would, because we should actually maybe have a whole session on epistemology. But I mean, there's some things like 2 + 2 being 4. If someone else said 2 + 2 is 7, and that's mine, and that's yours, and you're fine, then that doesn't work. Okay. And so the question is, are there things other than mathematics that are like that? Like someone enjoys torturing animals for fun, and someone else says it's wrong. Is that the same as I like vanilla and you like chocolate? And if the answer is no, then you're saying, okay, that person enjoys torturing animals for fun, but they're wrong. Because there are reasons other than the pleasure you get from it that makes it be really wrong. Okay. But that would, then that's a great opener to the question, what is truth and what is knowledge on a deeper level? And what are the things that help us attain those? So, good. Yes?
Could you just give me a quick yes or no?
This is a trick question.
So it's tough for me to wrap my head around the possibility that 2 people or 2 groups can come together on reality when you're adding family, religion, and politics to any discussion.
Right.
So is that possible?
Yes. Since you wanted a yes or no. But I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying it's easy. And they might not in this life.
I just want to say, my opinion is that there can be opinions, and then there can be things that are truth, that have a truth.
Right.
There are some things that I think just have opinions on it, and you can have multiple opinions on it, and
Right.
there's other things where are actually factual truths.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of gray line in that.
Yeah.
Because some people think some things have a truth that in fact may not.
Right.
So,
That's good. Yeah. No, that would be a great whole talk about to sort out opinion, falsehood, truth, knowledge, ignorance. That's a branch of philosophy. It's called epistemology, which is the study of knowledge. One more? No? Good. All right. Thank you very much.
Bring back dueling. End the conversation.
Bring back what?
Dueling.
Oh, dueling. Yikes.
It's an end to conversation.
Yeah, it's violent.
Okay, no.
Hi, I hope you would consider doing a class where we do the swimmer or we do COVID.
Yeah.
Have a discussion.
Okay, I don't know if I got my line.
I was.
Oh,
I
good, thank
enjoyed
you for
it.
coming. So you want me to do a more controversial? Yeah.
Well, not
Which topic?
necessarily.
Yeah, would you like?
I really haven't gone